Welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey through the automotive world. We talk about the latest news, from new makes and models to new technology to all of the must-have options available. Whether you're a fan of the old classics, love the latest models and technology, or have never met a vehicle you didn't want to work on, the GSMC Car Podcast has something for every car enthusiast.
Welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, David Lucy Mabel. Okay, so today, folks, we are going to be looking at the most influential car of the 2010s, or the 2010s, as many people still call it. We are reaching the end of our series. This will be the last full decade covered in this series, and then the next podcast will be my prediction as to what type of car will be the most influential car in the 2020s. So here we go. We've got the Tesla Model S. This is what I have chosen as the most influential car of the 2010s, and I'm going to tell you why. I am not a huge fan of Tesla, as you all perhaps have heard so far in my previous 50-something podcast right about now. I am not a huge fan of Tesla, but as someone who's trying to be objective and someone who's trying to give where credit is due, give credit where credit is due, I should say, I cannot deny the fact that Tesla, especially in the last 10 or so years, has really revolutionized the way the world looks at electric cars. And the Tesla Model S was one of the first practical electric cars, if I could put it that way. One of the first practical or modern electric cars, because the one Tesla model before that was the Roadster, and the Roadster was simply a two-seater sports car. It wasn't meant to be sold, in large numbers. I would say it was sort of a novelty. It wasn't a vehicle that could be used every day. But the Tesla Model S would change that, not only for Tesla, but really for the entire world as far as electrical cars go. Because, the Nissan Leaf existed as a purely electric car, but the Nissan Leaf has not garnered nearly as much popularity as Teslas have. And I couldn't tell you why exactly, because, then again, I probably could tell you why. The Nissan Leaf is just not as up to par as Teslas are. The Teslas are technologically extremely advanced and fairly luxurious, and they have this sort of cachet to them. If you have a Tesla, it's seen as a prestige symbol. I mean, it's prestigious to have a Tesla. If you don't have a Tesla and you drive a Nissan Leaf, I mean, you might as well just be a regular everyday commuter. It's not as fancy as a Tesla, a Nissan Leaf, that is. So, but let me get started on the Tesla Model S. So we've got 4 different segments that we're going to be doing in this podcast as usual. And the first segment will be history. Second segment will be specifications. Third segment will be the history and other cars of the 2010s. And the fourth segment, as always, will be my thoughts. So yes, Tesla was founded in 2003. Before you understand exactly the impact of the Model S, one must first realize the impact of Tesla as a company. And I would be remiss to introduce a car such as the Tesla Model S that is so relatively new on the market without exactly, how would I say, without introducing the company that it comes from, especially such a new company as Tesla that is making such a big mark. So get this. Tesla was founded in 2003, but the first car, the Roadster, wasn't produced until 2008 for the 2009 model year. The Tesla Model S was their first sedan and second model of car. Tesla has been controversial in the car community, and I'm going to tell you why. Tesla, I would describe Tesla as a tech company that makes cars. And here's the reason why. Tesla's first and foremost are technologically advanced. That's really their selling point. They're not particularly built very well. They're not particularly reliable. They're not particularly sturdy or even, frankly, particularly luxurious. What they are is very technologically advanced. Loads and loads of technology in these cars. A Tesla essentially is a rolling computer. And especially now that they're receiving updates on software over air, over the internet, it might as well be a computer. So a Tesla is a computer on wheels. A Tesla is not an automobile in the most traditional sense, in which it is a vehicle that, I guess, a Tesla is an automobile, but it's not the automobile that we think of when we think automobile. At least us people who are not Generation Zers being born today and then not getting behind the wheel of a car for at least 15, 16, 17 years. By the time they start getting their license, driver's licenses, children who are born today, it'll be 2037. And by then, goodness, some, car companies like, Volvo are going to be, pledging to commit all electric cars by 2025 is what they're saying. So by 2037, Volvo would have gone long electric if that's actually what they're planning on doing. So back to what I'm saying. The Tesla Model S is not the car that you think of when you think car. Tesla Model S has taken the concept of car and completely flipped it on its head. Is it a vehicle that gets you from point A to point B under its own power? Absolutely. But that's probably the only thing it shares in common with other regular conventional automobiles. It doesn't have an engine. It doesn't have a transmission. It's battery operated alone by 2 electric motors in some trims. There is, even driving it is not even intuitive. You don't expect, when you drive a regular automobile, be it an automatic or a manual transmission, you expect the car to shift, for there to be shift points. There's nothing like that. It's a direct drive system that drives the Tesla. It's not what you think when you think automobile. So that being said, Tesla is more of a tech company that happens to make cars. The reason why Tesla has become so controversial is sort of because of that very philosophy. Quality issues were once rampant and frankly probably still are. Multiple lawsuits and controversies ranging from mismanagement of COVID-19 precautions in their factories to environmental violations relating to hazardous waste. Well, the problem is, Tesla, being owned by Elon Musk, is not a car company in the way it's structured. It's structured more like a tech company. They manufacture all of their components somewhere else, and then they ship them to California, in which they're put together. What is like that? iPhones are like that. All of their internal components might be manufactured in China or Japan, and then they might be assembled here in the United States. It's a horribly impractical way to make vehicles. Cadillac tried doing that with the Alante back in the early 90s, in which they manufactured the body in Italy and then assembled it here in the United States. It was horrendously expensive. Tesla is trying to do that. And I suspect the only reason why Tesla has become so successful is partly because it's not a regular car company. But the fact that it's not a regular car company might have given it success on the front end, but will eventually end up biting it in the rear end. And I'm going to explain you why. Because they're not a traditional car company, they don't have to go through a bunch of hoops that regular car companies would have to go through, different design teams and whatnot, and approvals and other things of that sort. Basically, Elon Musk says, this is what we're going to do. He gets with this group of designers, makes it, and then boom, it's there. That's why he's able to create something as ridiculous as the Cybertruck. So now when you've got something like that, which is essentially the company, from my perspective at least, is run like a dictatorship in which Elon Musk says, the word, mums the word in his sense, what he says goes. So that's why there's nobody else who's going to, they're not different committees within like a traditional car company that Tesla has that are going to be being like, no, we can't do that. No, we can't do that. No, we can't do that. Elon Musk is filthy rich. They don't have to necessarily, they don't necessarily have to conform to like emissions. They don't have emissions. They're completely electric. They don't have to conform to other sort of government regulations concerning things of that sort. There's a lot of hoops they don't have to jump through. That's why they've been able to make cars this quickly and then be able to get such a huge market share in such a short amount of time. Now, that being said, now, when Tesla actually wants to start tackling the car companies that actually have the infrastructure in place, have the factory systems in place, have the workers, have the funds, have the brand loyalty in place to start manufacturing electric cars, Tesla, if they don't completely revamp their business model, is not going to be able to keep up. Tesla has one factory in which they assemble their cars. They've got one. Nissan, which is not even a particularly good car company right now. Nissan, off the top of my head, has at least 3 different factories in the United States alone. And this is not the only place they sell cars. Now think of, other car companies like Mercedes-Benz, hugely successful car company that sells cars worldwide. Think of how many factories they have. Think of how many factories GM has. Think of how many factories Ford has. Think of how many factories Toyota has. Once all of these giant car companies start making cars that are electric, Tesla's not going to be able to keep up. Because just like he took us by storm, and by us, I mean us traditionalists who drive internal combustion engines, just like he took us by storm, when we finally make the transition to electric, we're going to take them by storm. And not only that, Tesla doesn't have the brand loyalty that car companies that have been around for 100 years have. But I'm not here to rat on Tesla. I'm here to tell you about the Tesla Model S, why it's the most influential car of the 2010s. The 2013 Model S became the first electric car to top the monthly new car sales ranking in any country. It led twice in Norway, as well as leading in Denmark in 2015. It was the best-selling plug-in electric car in the world in 2015 and 2016. Despite quality issues early on in its production, the Model S won so many awards, including being named the car of the century by Car and Driver. What I think concerning that, being named car of the century is only 21 years old. I don't think we can necessarily name a car of the century right away. We can name the car of the century in like 2099 as we've looked back over 99 years of the 21st century, right as we're about to turn into the 22nd century. Then we could look at the car of the century. Because I can tell you right now, they may consider it the car of the century now. In 50, 60 years, it will no longer be considered the car of the century. Something bigger, something better is going to come along and dethrone the Model S. Because frankly, the Model S, being as revolutionary as it was, being as special as it was, the Model S was not the first electric car ever made. The Model S was not the first electric car ever made. Some people might think it's the first electric car ever made because they don't know any better, but the Model S is not the first electric car ever made. The Model S was probably the most commercially successful electric car. It was probably the most commercially successful electric car, but definitely not, the first one or the best one or anything of that sort. It was probably the first commercially successful one and perhaps the most influential electric car ever built, but definitely not the first. So in the grand scheme of history, I don't think you can name the Tesla Model S as the best car of the 21st century so prematurely. Maybe the best car of this quarter of the century, because we're almost to 2025. That'll be a quarter into the century. But really, honestly, it's hard to say if it is even the most successful. It doesn't deserve the title of most influential car of the 21st century just yet. We have to wait until the 21st century is almost over in order to name it that. And in June of 2015, after being on the market for only 3 years, the Tesla Model S had traveled a combined 1 billion miles. To put that into perspective, the Nissan Leaf cars, which were also all electric, had only driven a combined 625 million miles. So there you have it. That's basically the background and some of the history of the Tesla Model S as to why it is the most influential car of the 2010s. And I don't mean to rat on it too much and be like, I don't like Tesla, I don't like this, I don't like that. It truly is a very revolutionary car. It is a very successful car, and it is very influential indeed, in which I'm going to try to capture that better in the rest of this podcast so you all can really see what exactly the Tesla Model S meant for the world when it came out. So please stay tuned.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Okay, welcome back, folks. So here we are. We have discussed basically the background of the Tesla Model S. Now we're going to get into the good stuff. We're going to get into essentially the meat of what exactly makes the Model S special. Its specifications. Because the Model S, if it were not for the specifications, to the untrained eye, it might not be anything special. If it were not for what it provided as far as a radical departure of what a car is supposed to be in the psyche of the average car buyer, then it wouldn't be special at all. So let me explain to you exactly what makes the Model S so revolutionary as far as its specifications go. Okay, so here we are. The Tesla Model S is fully electric. And I know it may be kind of dumb for me to put that out there and for me to specify the fact that it is fully electric. But what we don't understand is that a lot of times cars are classified as electric vehicles, but they're plug-in hybrids with backup, internal combustion engines. They might be partially electric. There are very few cars being made today that are 100% electric. Aside from Tesla, maybe the Chevy Bolt, and maybe the Nissan Leaf, Porsche Taycan, I think that's how they pronounce it, Porsche Taycan, and maybe some of the Volvo Polestars. I can name probably 7 models off the top of my head today that are fully electric. You've got the Tesla Roadster, the Model Y, the Model X, the Model 3, the Model S, all from Tesla. You've got the Nissan Leaf. I think there's one Volvo, Polestar that's fully electric. There's the Porsche Taycan. I think there's the Jaguar F-Pace or something. That's 9 cars that I can think of right now that are fully electric. All of the other ones are partially electric. They have plug-in hybrid systems that have a small, internal combustion engine that extends the range, that makes it, very fuel efficient, but still relying on internal combustion because their electric only range is like less than 50 miles. So that's why I had to specify the fact that the Tesla Model S is fully electric. There's no internal combustion engine. However, there was an extended range model with a gas engine that was being considered early on in the history of the Model S, but it was canceled because Elon Musk had specified that Tesla would only be making fully electric cars. And that's another thing. How many car companies out there could the CEO of the company, the owner of the company, make such a decision without really anybody giving him any sort of pushback? Like, you try to do that in GM. I tell you, the president of GM is just the person who oversees General Motors. He's not the one who makes decisions himself. He's not an autocrat. He doesn't just say, this is what GM's going to be doing and what I say is it. There's lots of committees that have to be consulted, and there's lots of marks underneath GM that have to be consulted, which is part of the reason why such large companies with all this bureaucracy and red tape that they have to cut through, there's a lot of them who have not done anything as radical as Tesla just yet, simply because it's taking them a long time, because there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. A lot of red tape needs to be cut through before they can finally start doing something radical. But once they start, Tesla better, ramp up its production or start building new factories or change its business model because they're not going to be able to keep up. But anyway, so the specifications of the Model S. The Model S can be ordered with a single rear-mounted motor that powers the rear wheels, or dual motors, one up front, one in back, that powers all wheels. That feature would be denoted by a D in the model name. The two motor D models have a combined horsepower rating of 825 horsepower and 960 pound-feet of torque. So what we have here, we have a vehicle that is essentially a supercar. Essentially a supercar by numbers alone, except it's meant to be a luxurious commuter vehicle. Something likened to a BMW 5 Series or something. Or right around that sort of segment. I mean, it's some markets it's classified as like a full-size sedan, but really the Tesla Model S is a mid-size luxury sedan, if we're going to compare it to other cars that have come before. So a mid-size luxury sedan that has more horsepower than some Lamborghinis. It's so odd to think of that. Because one of the reasons why the Tesla Model S is so influential is because a car like this is setting the tone for what the future is going to be like. No longer in the future will you have people gawking over cars that have 800 horsepower. Like some people today gawk over, oh my gosh, the Chrysler Hellcat series, be it a Dodge, be it whatever they put they stuff the Hellcat motor into nowadays. Those cars have 600, 700, 800 horsepower like it's nothing. People gawk over those. Heck, I even gawk over them, and I don't even respect Chrysler products. But no longer will those be the days when electric cars inevitably become the norm. No longer will that be a thing that people are gawking over, oh my God, my car has 800 horsepower. 800 horsepower will be normal. Almost 1,000 pound-feet of torque will be completely normal. So that raises the question, what will it do for things like car tuner culture? People who tune their engines to make as much horsepower as possible, like my friend Grant. What will that do? when electric cars eventually begin to take over, maybe not within our lifetimes, but certainly within the lifetimes of our grandchildren, what will happen? The Tesla Model S is paving the way for what could be the end of the internal combustion engine. And if not the end of the popularity of the internal combustion engine. That is extremely revolutionary, because if you haven't noticed, all of the cars that we did before this, the Pontiac Aztek, what was the one from the 90s? I can't remember the most influential car of the 90s. There was the Pontiac Aztek. There was a car from the 90s, goodness. Let me tell you. The McLaren F1. And then the Chrysler minivans of the 80s. And then there was the one of the 1970s, which was the AMC Pacer. The 60s, the Lamborghini Miura. The 50s, the Citroën DS. The 40s, the Volkswagen Beetle. The 30s, the Duesenberg Model... No, wait. It wasn't the Chrysler Airflow. The 20s, the Duesenberg Model J. The 1910s, the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. The 1900s, which was the Ford Model T. And then you've got the 1890s, which is the Jury Motor Wagon. And then you've got the 1880s, the first car ever made, which was the Benz Patent Motor Wagon. What do we have? What do all of those cars have in common? They're all internal combustion engines. They all were restricted by the fact that they used fossil fuels to combust, they burned fossil fuels in order to get around. First car on our list that is not an internal combustion engine car, that is a fully electric car, does not rely on fossil fuels to get from point A to point B. At least not directly relying on fossil fuels. So now, what do you do with something like that? That's what makes it so influential, is because it's turned the car community on its head. Tesla, the Model S being their first practical model, a car that can seat 5 people in relative comfort and get from point A to point B quickly, fairly reliably, and extremely efficiently. This is not something that people were able to do. Electric cars, just like when I did my podcast on electric cars have been around for nearly as long as gasoline cars. There were 3 sorts of methods of propelling vehicles back in the early days of the automobile. You had gasoline, or, well, not necessarily gasoline. You had fossil fuels, internal combustion engines. They could have been diesel or gasoline. You had steam, and you had electricity. Gasoline proved to be the most reliable and the most practical. Steam was the most powerful by far, but steam was finicky and steam was really complex. Not to say that steam engines themselves were complex, but the simple steam engines were not very quick and were not very practical and frankly could be dangerous. Steam vehicles were the most powerful and probably the most reliable, but the steam technology had pretty much reached a point. It had reached a point, and it wouldn't go any further than that, because it had gotten to the point, the most advanced steam cars, like not even stainless steamer, like white steamer or whatnot. You can look it up on Jay Leno's Garage. The most advanced steam cars had steam technology that could propel these cars to easily 100 miles per hour. In which those cars did, and they were huge, they were massive, but their steam engines had gotten so complicated to that point, with so many moving parts, and with so many things to consider, complicated starting procedures, all of this, all of that, ceramic-coated boilers, or a bunch of foolishness that was just not practical to even manufacture anymore for something that they would eventually make billions of cars. Now, you've got electric vehicles. Electric vehicles probably being the safest, the quietest, and the simplest, were also not very reliable and were not very practical. Because early battery technology, you might be lucky to get 20 or 30 miles of range, if even that much. And of course, you couldn't go very fast, because if you went fast, then you would suck more battery life. And of course, in those days, batteries may not have been rechargeable. You may have needed to replace them every time they ran out. It wasn't practical. Combustion engines led the way. And combustion engines, in some respect, are actually, in all respects, really, are still leading the way. But now they've got a credible threat. The credible threat is the modern electric vehicle. The modern electric vehicle, the first practical one that has been mass-produced, is the Tesla Model S. So now that you've got the Tesla Model S in the game, the influence that this car will have will be unbounded. You will not be able to contain the amount of influence that a car like the Tesla Model S has, because it is literally influencing the future of all automobiles. So many of those cars that I mentioned were influential for their decade, were influential maybe for the next 2 decades afterward. But so many of them are not relevant anymore, because the technology is old, it's outdated, it's no longer needed. It was a product of its time and of its time alone. The Tesla Model S, being a product of the 2010s, will still be talked about in the 2110s 100 years from now. I guarantee it. Because of how revolutionary and because of how influential it was. Not only are Tesla's becoming more and more viable as far as electric cars go. Sorry for that pause there. Teslas are shockingly prepared when it comes to charging. They have a network of 908 different charging stations in the United States and 1,826 charging stations worldwide. For a period of time, Tesla even offered a battery swap program in which Tesla owners, while on the go, could swap batteries at special stations that would charge the original battery while the owner swapped it out for a fully charged one, and the original one would be replaced on the return trip after it had been retrieved. A lack of demand, however, caused this program to shut down after only one swapped battery station was opened in 2016. It was shut down later on that year. But now think of it this way. Now, if this idea were to catch on, this idea of having swappable batteries, what I predict as far as the electric car future goes, and really Tesla, even though Tesla may not be around anymore by the time, electric cars are fully taken over, or they might be under a new umbrella, they may no longer be independent. What I predict that electric cars will begin to have standardized batteries. And not only will they have standardized batteries, the batteries will be in such a way that they will be able to be replaceable like this. So people don't have to wait for their car to charge. They can go somewhere and then they could join like a membership in which they go to a charging station. Instead of charging the car and waiting 40 minutes for it to charge, they just swap out their battery. I predict they will get to a point where they're very easily serviceable and very easily accessible, that the average person with any knowledge worth their salt will be able to swap out their battery for a new one and be on their merry way, just almost as instant as filling up a tank of fuel. And I believe that will be the future. You will have battery stations in which you take out your old battery, put it to charge, and then you put the new one in. Because that was a brilliant idea. And that idea was too ahead of its time. That's probably why it didn't catch on. But I can guarantee you a similar idea of swapping out batteries on the go will come back. It may not come back within my lifetime, but it will come back. And who started all this? Tesla Model S. I predict that the way this car was engineered and the way this car was made is the way of the future. There ain't no doubt about it. And anybody who says otherwise obviously is not keeping up with car news. So anyway, that concludes our segment 2. Please stay tuned for segment 3, in which I'm going to be discussing essentially the history of the 2010s and some other influential cars that existed during that time period. So please stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching.
Hey!
The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Okay, welcome back, folks. We have discussed the background of the Tesla Model S. We have discussed the specifications, what makes it so special. Now we're going to be discussing the 2010s as a decade in general. We're going to take a break from speaking about the Model S, and we're going to take a look at what else is going on in the world, as well as some other influential cars that are being produced during this time period. So, let's get started. Okay, so as far as other cars go, we've got cars such as the Cadillac ELR. The Cadillac ELR was produced in 2014 and 2016. For some reason that I should get into another podcast one day down the line if I decide to do that. They did not produce a car for 2015. So the Cadillac ELR was a 2014 and a 2016 model only. It was Cadillac's first attempt at building a plug-in hybrid vehicle based on a retuned version of the Chevy Volt's platform. It was essentially a sales failure with only 3,000 being sold. So yeah, the Cadillac ELR, I will say though, is probably the best looking, alternative fuel vehicle ever made. Like the best looking EV, even though it wasn't a full EV, but it's probably one of the best looking ones out there. All other electric vehicles look just odd. Some of them look really good. The BMW i8 is really nice. All Teslas just look weird. The Tesla Model S doesn't look bad, but everything else that Tesla makes just looks weird. The Volvo cars are looking pretty good. The Porsche Taycan looks kind of weird too. There's another one being built off of that platform too. I don't think it's a Porsche Taycan. There's something else that's being built off of that platform. It's kind of weird as well. But to tell you the truth, electric cars have not always been very pretty. But anyway, so you had the Cadillac ELR, even though it was a sales failure, probably the best looking one of them ever made. Just like I mentioned, the BMW i8, it was a plug-in hybrid sports car made from 2014 to 2020. Had an incredible mile per gallon rating of 112 US gallons per mile. Not 112 U.S. gallons per mile, but 112 miles per U.S. gallon. Pardon me. It became the best-selling plug-in electric sports car, and 20,000 units were sold during its production run. And the Ford Panther platform. I had to mention the Ford Panther platform, not because it was necessarily one of the most influential platforms of this decade. Frankly, quite the opposite, actually, because by this time it had become very old. This had been the longest running platform in North American car history. Known for their excellent reliability, Panther platform cars came to an end in late 2011 for the 2012 model year, and the last one was a Ford Crown Victoria that was built for, I believe, export to the Middle East, if I remember reading that correctly. Yeah, the Ford Panther platform had gone on for 33 years, from 1979 to 2012. They made a ton of them during that time period. I can say with great confidence it is impossible to go on a drive anywhere in America that other people live without seeing a Ford Panther platform vehicle. Be it a Ford Crown Victoria, a Lincoln Town Car, a Mercury Grand Marquis, a Mercury Marauder, a Ford Country Squire, a Mercury Colony Park, so many Ford Panther platforms. Lincoln, I already said Lincoln Town Car. The late Continentals were also built on them. There was another Lincoln, I believe. There was a Ford. The Ford LTD was also built on a Panther platform. Yeah. This thing was a relic from the days of the gas crisis after they had downsized. Funny enough, the Panther platform was a downsize from the larger platform that they had before that. Panther platform, super reliable, super influential for its time period, I guess, way back then, because it had, marked the downsizing of American cars during the end of the gas crisis, into the 1980s. But not only that, I had to mention it because it was really the end of an era. The end of an era. No longer would American cars be built body on frame construction, rear wheel drive. Very old fashioned method of building cars. Essentially, cars, back in those days were built just like trucks are today. They have separate bodies that bolt onto chassis, and they are very easy to fix, very rugged, very overbuilt, and very reliable. Cars will no longer be like that, which is kind of saddening, but at the same time, it is also the end of an era. So there you have it, really. Yeah, so that was the end of the Panther platform. Let me move on into the history of the 2010s, which, I was born in 1997, so I have lived through the 2010s. I grew up throughout the 2010s. This was a very formative decade in my life, so I remember a lot of things that went on. Some history. The Arab Spring from 2010 to 2012, a series of uprisings and coups d'etat in the Arab countries, mainly in North Africa, in response to oppressive governmental regimes. Muammar Gaddafi, which was the Libyan dictator, would be deposed during this time period. And I think there was a Mubarak somewhere, I think in Egypt, that would be deposed or something. I mean, there would be a lot of unrest going on in the Arab countries. Not to say that, the Middle East doesn't have enough unrest anyway, but this was not just in the Middle East. This was in Northern Africa as well. Lots of unrest in response to oppressive regimes that were going on during the time period. Not only was there the Arab Spring, you got the 2010 Haiti earthquake, 7.2 magnitude earthquake that struck the Haitian capital of Port-au-Prince, killing up to, some estimates range as far as 300 to 400,000 people. Others are more conservative as 90 to 100,000 people. Point is, it killed hundreds of thousands of people. On January 12, 2010. I'm Haitian, so I still remember where I was at the time I heard the news of the Haiti earthquake. This was my 8th grade year. I was working on a book project this was not my 8th grade year. This was 2010. This was my 6th grade year. I was working on a project for reading class, and I just remember sitting in front of the television in my living room. And my goodness, back then, folks, if I may, this is just 2010, but mind you, this is the beginning of 2010. So all of our furniture is from the late 90s, early 2000s period. We had this giant TV, one of those those ones with the really thick screens. I can't remember what they're called. They're not flat screen plasma screens. They're like really big, bulky TVs. And this entertainment center in which the TV sat in, and then you had slots for CDs and other music sorts. And we had this wow, let's just say it was a different time. But anyway, so we had our entertainment center and our TV, and we were all sitting in the living room, my family being Haitian. We're all looking, and we're frantically trying to get into contact with family members that are living in Port-au-Prince, and it was just, oh my gosh, it was a horrible time. It was a horrible time. I remember my dad, who had gone on a relief mission just a few days after the earthquake had happened, and a very powerful aftershock struck him while he was there. Goodness, thankfully he was okay. The Haiti earthquake displaced as many as 1 to 3 million people. People were buried in mass graves because the heat and the humidity after bodies had been trapped in the rubble for so many days, turning into weeks, turning into months. I mean, it was the country that was already an upside down country had turned even more upside down after that war. It's just pure chaos. Just chaos out the wazoo. It was horrible. Yeah, the Haiti earthquake. Yeah, that's something that will, as a Haitian at least, that will mark the 2010s forever in my life. 2016, President Donald J. Trump is elected as the 45th president of the United States, the only president to be impeached twice. Trump was one of the most controversial presidents in American history. I'm not going to get into my political views, but there you are. Trump was president in 2016. He won the presidency, the electoral vote against Hillary Clinton in 2016. Yeah, and then there was Osama bin Laden, killed in Pakistan. I believe this was 2011 during a raid at his compound. In 2014, Malaysia Airlines MH370 goes missing. The majority of the plane has still not been recovered. All 239 passengers and crew are presumed dead. This is said to be one of the greatest disasters in, airline history the world has ever known, if not the greatest disaster in airline history. Such a mysterious thing. I remember when this happened too, goodness. By this point, I was in high school. I think this was sophomore year of high school, if I remember correctly. End of sophomore year, maybe beginning of junior year. But I remember that when this plane had gone missing, it was the most bizarre thing ever. There were searches that were covering hundreds of thousands of square miles of ocean. It was like Amelia Earhart, but on a grand scale. Till this day, most of the cockpit and the black boxes of this plane have not been recovered. It's so mysterious. It just vanished into thin air. Nobody has any clue where it is. I mean, it was a year later that some, fragments of the plane had, washed up on the shores of Réunion, an African island in the Indian Ocean, I believe. That's where some of the wreckage had washed up. But as far as, the remains of any crew or passengers, as far as the cockpit, as far as the black boxes, all of the, the important things of the plane have never been recovered. And heck, goodness, this might be, my gosh, it might be decades before they ever find this plane. It might be decades. Heck, it might even be 100 years before they finally find it. Because, as you all know, we know more about the surface of the moon than we know about the depths of our own oceans. So, once this thing is in that ocean, goodness, if it's not recovered within a certain period of time, it sinks to the bottom, goodness, ain't nobody seen it again. So that is very, very tragic, what happened with that. And then, of course, you have the 2011 Fukushima nuclear meltdown after the earthquake and tsunami in northeastern Japan. When I had gone to Japan in 2018 and 2019, I was able to visit Matsushima, which is an island off the northeast coast of Japan in Miyagi Prefecture. I had gone there and I had seen like a little museum exhibit that was propped up to basically teach visitors about the impact of the tsunami it had in the area. The water was like 9 feet tall in some places. Like they had a mark on the wall. I still have a picture of this. They had like a mark on the wall in which the water was that high during the earthquake. I mean, during the subsequent tsunami, just to let people know. I stayed in a house that had cracks in the wall from that earthquake that had happened at that time 7 years before. I mean, it was very real. I had friends who lived through that. Of course, they weren't my friends at the time. They didn't become my friends until I went to Japan in 2018 on a mission trip. But yeah, seeing how that impacted the area and, knowing that my family was greatly impacted by an earthquake just a year before this one happened. I mean, that was... Yeah, that was very eye-opening to see what the great tsunami and earthquake of 2011 did to northeastern Japan. So anyway, that's the 2010s, the history and some other cars that were built during the 2010s, just to give you a perspective on what the world was like when the Tesla Model S was being produced. So please stay tuned for segment 4, in which I'm going to talk about my personal thoughts on the Tesla Model S. So please stay tuned.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings-on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
Okay, welcome back, folks. So we spoke about the history of the 2010s, and now we're going to be speaking about my personal thoughts on the Tesla Model S. So here we are. We've got the Tesla Model S, which, as you all know, I'm not a big fan of. Tesla is not my cup of tea. I don't like them, and I don't particularly care for Elon Musk either. Here's the reason why. There's a saying that says someone can have too many irons in the fire. That means that person is trying to do too many things at once. And I think that's classically what has happened to Elon Musk. Elon Musk is obviously a very successful businessman and an inventor and a scientist. But Elon Musk is doing so many different things, and things that are not necessarily related to each other. And I understand that he's trying to diversify his brand and his technology and whatnot. But you got to get to a point in which you really take a look at what you're trying to do and then just do what you're trying to do. Choose the thing that you know how to do the most, that you are the best at, and focus on that. Here's my example. When you've got too many irons in the fire, as they say, the quality of your things tends to suffer. Tesla quality has never been known to be extremely good. Teslas have been known to be very technologically advanced vehicles, very futuristic vehicles, but they have never been known for their sheer reliability or their build quality. Elon Musk's SpaceX program, goodness, I can't speak. His SpaceX program, during testing stages, one of their rockets, upon trying to land, burst into flames and exploded. You know, that doesn't inspire much confidence. And I'm not going to say that it's been a complete failure. Neither thing has been a complete failure, but they've had their failures. And not only have they had their failures, said failures could very well have been prevented if he had just focused on one thing and refined that one product into making it the absolute best that he could possibly make it. My problem with Tesla is that Tesla, like I said, is a technology company that is meddling with a bunch of other industries that also happens to be making cars on the side. If you want to be successful in the realm of automobiles, you have to dedicate yourself to making automobiles because he's competing with the likes of Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Ford, GM, the Volkswagen Auto Group, and many other car companies out there that are eventually going to start making electric vehicles. Now, when they finally cut through their red tape foolishness and start, making electric vehicles for the public, what are people like Elon Musk going to be doing? You have some of these companies that have 20, 30, 40 different factories. Once all of those begin to be converted into EV factories, electric vehicle factories, not only are they going to way overproduce the electric vehicle compared to what Tesla's making, they're also going to outsell them. Because now, most Teslas are not really attainable. Most Teslas are still prohibitively expensive. And if not prohibitively expensive, the ones that are attainable, maintenance costs are expensive because not every mechanic can work on a Tesla if a Tesla decides to give you a problem. Not everything can be fixed on a Tesla yourself. You can't do backyard mechanics on a Tesla. If your Tesla has a problem, you either have to call up Tesla headquarters, let them know what your problem is so they can send you a fix over the internet, however much that's going to cost, or you're going to be doing something like taking it to a Tesla dealership and having them cost you an arm and a leg for labor and parts for something that you can't do yourself because it's not technology that is commonly known amongst regular people. Once the actual established car companies with good brand loyalty, which is important when it comes to cars, once they start producing electric vehicles to the volume that Tesla's producing them and to even exceed that volume, and they're going to be producing them for much cheaper and selling them for much cheaper, Tesla's going to be put out of business or Tesla's going to be bought out. It's going to be one of those two. Because his business model is not sustainable. I'm not going to talk about how I'm some sort of business guru and I know everything there is to know about business. I obviously don't. I'm talking about cars. I'm talking about car history. However, I will say that there were many other car companies that started up like Tesla that tried to do something different. And then eventually when the other big car companies caught up to them, they went out of business. You got probably 2 big car companies per continent here we're talking about. You got Ford and GM here in America. You probably got Volkswagen Group and Mercedes-Benz over in Europe. And you've got Toyota and Honda over in Japan. Those are probably the 2 biggest car companies in all the continents that I just mentioned. All it takes is for those 6 car companies to start mass producing electric vehicles, and then Tesla will soon go bye-bye. There are people who are loyal Volkswagen Group buyers, who buy Volkswagens, who buy Porsches, who buy all of the cars in the Volkswagen Group because they like those cars. There are people who are loyal to Mercedes-Benz, who only buy Mercedes-Benz. There are people who are loyal to Toyota. There are people who are loyal to Honda. There are people who are loyal to Ford, and there are people who are loyal to GM. Once those cars start coming out of those big companies, Tesla is either going to be bought out or he's going to go out of business. He's not going to be able to keep up, or he's going to fade into obscurity. Much like car companies like Suzuki. You don't even hear anything about Suzuki anymore. Is Suzuki even still making cars? Who cares? Nobody knows because they faded into obscurity. They couldn't keep up. The car manufacturing business is a business of survival of the fittest. Tesla may be enjoying his heyday now because everybody's taking so dang long to catch up to him and his technology. But he will eventually go under if he doesn't decide to buckle his seatbelt, no pun intended, and then start making Tesla into a car company instead of a tech company that produces cars. Most people who are going to be buying cars, if you want to reach the average consumer, they're not going to care that you can put your car in park and then use the steering wheel as a video game prop for the video games that come in your center console. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's cool. Nobody's denying that. Nobody needs it, however. Nobody needs it, and most people don't care about it. You have to make the people care. Not only do you have to make the people care, you have to make them want what you are selling. So even though we speak of the Tesla Model S as the most influential car of the 2010s, which I believe it is, I think what's going to happen with Tesla cars, they are going to be so influential in the sense that they are going to teach all the other electric vehicle, hopefuls out there what not to do and what to do. They are the guinea pigs, essentially, in this electric car market. Tesla are the guinea pigs. And Tesla does not realize that they are the guinea pigs. They think they are the way of the future. I think they're the guinea pigs. They're going in, they're weeding out who's going to be buying electrical cars, who's going to be driving them, who's going to be interested in them. They're weeding those people out. And then the other car companies, what they're doing, they're sitting on their chairs and they're watching and learning from Tesla. And then every mistake that Tesla makes, which they've made tons of mistakes, any mistake that they make, they're going to learn from it and be sure not to do that. And that's how some successful startup companies have happened. Because Lexus was a startup made from Toyota to try to market itself to more luxurious, cars so people could buy them. So now what Toyota did, Toyota took, note of how well the German cars were doing in America and then did everything the German cars did, but did it better and did it cheaper and more efficiently. And they were able to sell their Lexuses in America very well because they watched and they learned. Somebody had to take the fall, though, and start doing it first. Tesla has taken that fall and started doing it first. Now, as their cars end up in junkyards someday, as their cars get wrecked, as their cars begin to deteriorate, and they have to make more cars, then the other car companies are going to see what Tesla has done right and what Tesla has done wrong, and then coupled with their business model and coupled with the fact that they are extremely successful as far as sales and brand loyalty goes, they're going to take that to their advantage and they're going to start selling luxurious, electric cars. And if not luxurious electric cars that are available to the average everyday person. That are available to the laymen out there. So now, once the other car companies start doing that, Tesla could pack his bags and move to Mars. Because he ain't going to make it in the automobile industry. He's big now, he won't stay big forever. He'll be bought out. If not bought out, he'll just close his doors. And that's kind of sad. But it is what it is. It is what it is. So there you have it, folks. There you have the complex history of the Tesla Model S. Why it is still the most influential car of the 2020s, or the 2010s, I should say. And how essentially what the impact of this car means for the future of cars. So if you enjoyed this podcast, please check us out on all of our social media pages and whatnot. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, you name it. Follow us, leave us a like, leave us a comment, and please stay tuned for our next episode on the most influential car, what we predict will be the most influential car of the 2010s. So, goodbye, folks.
You've been listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode.